Hi hobby friends, and welcome to another hobby hangout. In this week's video, I want to talk about Nighthaunt, specifically why I think they're a bad army and why I love them so much. Now, before I get into the video, I want to preface a couple of things. The first is that I don't want to say it's impossible to win games with Nighthaunt. While I do believe that they are a lower tier or a weaker army, obviously player skill has to factor into it. Player skill on your own, on your opponent's side, as well as the specific army matchup and the scenario you're playing, all have an effect on whether you're going to win the game or not. Just because I think the book is bad doesn't mean I don't think you can't win games. I'm also not going to complain about points specifically, although I will talk about it. I think that anything can be balanced, either made weaker or more powerful by increasing or decreasing the points. Obviously, you could reduce any unit to 1 point a model or no points a model, and it would be infinitely powerful. So I don't think Nighthaunt's power curve is specifically, it is specifically tied to points, but I don't think it's a bad army because of the points. And the third is that I'm not trying to hate on Nighthaunt. I've been playing Death since 6th edition Fantasy, so probably 20 years, and Nighthaunt were actually the reason I got into Age of Sigmar. When they were released in 2017, 2018, with the release of Age of Sigmar 2.0, they were the army that motivated me to get back into the game because I'd stopped playing Fantasy when Age of Sigmar 1.0 came out. I love the theme of the army in terms of the narrative. I love the look of it. The models are fantastic. They're a lot of fun to paint, but I actually haven't played with the Battletome Nighthaunt since they were first released. Within probably the first few months. After a couple of games with this book, I realized how garbage they were, and I haven't gone back to it since. And I hope Games Workshop does revisit the book. I hope they revisit the army and give it a rewrite to match the power curve of what's currently out there and to bring it more in line with a lot of the newer armies. Because this is one of the first books released of Age of Sigmar 2.0, it has fallen behind in terms of its relative strength and the way the army is written, or the way the book is written. And so obviously we're going in understanding that this is an older book and one of the earlier designs that Games Workshop has probably moved away from. There are 3 ways to play Nighthaunt. The first is in a pure Nighthaunt army using the Nighthaunt Battletome. The second is as allies in a Legion of Nagash list, and this covers all of its sub-faction legions, so Legion of Sacrament, Legion of Blood, Legion of Night, etc. And then there is Legion of Grief, which isn't really either, but it combines the best elements, I think, of both to allow Nighthaunt to play as a functioning army. And I actually think that that's probably one of the best ways to play Nighthaunt, but I'll cover that as we go. So the first is Nighthaunt in a pure Nighthaunt army, that is with the Nighthaunt Battletome. This is where I think the army has a lot of issues, and one of the biggest ones is in its allegiance ability, Wave of Terror. So what is Wave of Terror? In essence, when a unit charges in, if you roll an unmodified 10 plus for the charge, the unit fights immediately for free, and then can be chosen again in the fight phase to pile in and fight again. Basically, it's a free round of attacks. My problem is it's random. Unmodified 10 plus mathematically is 16.66%, which is essentially a 1 in 6 or a 6 plus. So the fact that you can't rely on it or depend on it makes it not really an ability you can count on. It's a nothing, in my opinion, because mathematically, 1 in every 6 charges you pull off, you'll actually be able to proc it. But you can't choose who it goes on or where it goes on. You're just praying and hoping. The fact that it's unmodified means you can't make it better. In my opinion, it's a garbage allegiance ability, and I would rather just not have it. Balance the army around not having the ability, or rewrite it to make it more consistent. Bring it in line with some of the other army abilities which are more consistent and provide value without hoping and praying. My second issue with the Nighthaunt Battletome are its battalions, actually. Death, as always, has been a very hero-heavy army. A lot of the heroes provide intrinsic support. They are force multipliers, they're buff pieces, and you need a lot of them to support the army. And in Age of Sigmar, it's no different. The problem with the Nighthaunt battalions is a lot of their good heroes either sit outside of their battalions, or you have to take 2 or 3 battalions if you want to reduce your drops, but also be able to combine heroes and units for extra abilities. You don't have to play with battalions, but the problem is in Age of Sigmar, if you can't reduce your drops, then you're essentially conceding the choice of first or second turn. You're risking a double turn, which means that you can't build a strategy around mitigating the impacts of the double turn. You're almost always going first because your opponent's going to want to go second. They're going to play for the double. And while there are advantages to having multiple drops, it's the fact that you don't have the choice. I also don't think many of the Nighthaunt artifacts, or now with the removal of a lot of the realm artifacts, that the battalions give much benefit beyond buying you an extra command point. And that's pretty much it. So, real issue there. The third is the lack of synergies in the army. A lot of your heroes are movement 6 or movement 12, 14 if they're cavalry, whereas a lot of your units are either going to be movement 5 or for your heavy fighting units, movement 8. So the problem is a lot of your fighting combat units, which want to be forward, but they need the hero support, the heroes can't keep up. Once you've dropped in, potentially from Underworlds, they're going to struggle to keep along and continually support your fighting units, especially because a lot of your buffs and AoE abilities are wholly within. You can't just tag one modeling unit like Legion of Nagash and get your abilities. You have to fit the entire unit around your hero. I don't think it's an issue with wholly within, but the fact that your heroes and your units can't keep speed at the same pace, or that your units will far outstrip the movement of your heroes as the game progresses, means that you're constantly struggling to keep those AoEs or their buffs around. Your units might be movement 8, but essentially they're going to be movement 6, plus whatever your hero rolls for their run, which I think is awful. One of the biggest issues I have with the book as well is its uniformity of stats. In Age of Sigmar, you have units that are good at taking objectives, units that are good at board control, controlling where your opponent can or can't go on the board, exerting influence for where you control, units that are good at killing, and then units for support. Now, obviously, the units that are worth taking tend to do multiples of those things or more of those things, not just a single one. Units that do fewer obviously aren't as worth taking unless they can do that one thing very, very well. So the problem with Nighthaunt, everything's ethereal. Everything either has a 4-up or 5-up save that can't be modified, and then they have their 6+ death save. Now, apart from mortal wounds, that means that you can math out what units are more survivable than others. It's basic mathematics. Because there are no toughness values in the game, you would actually do this for every unit. How many wounds does it take to inflict X damage or to wipe your unit? And when it comes to Nighthaunt, you can basically math out which units are the tankiest in terms of holding objectives for the bodies and for your board control. Hint, it's chain rasps. They're the cheapest, you get the most of them, and for the points you pay, they're the tankiest unit in the book. So forget the Spirit House, forget anything else. If you're looking for a tank unit, it's chain rasps. In terms of their ability to kill, most units in Nighthaunt have almost identical stats. It's some variation of hit and wound, 3+, 3+, 3+, 4+, 4+, 4+, rend 1, damage 1. Much like the durability, this means that you can also math out which units are going to be your fighting units, which ones will do the most damage. In terms of the points you pay, it's going to be Bladegeist Revenants. There are some arguments to be made for Grimgrass Reapers because they're battle line and they have the 2-inch reach, but a lot of the units serve no purpose because there's one unit that does the job better, right? So if you're looking for a tanking unit, you're not looking to Hex Wraiths, you're not looking to Spirit Host, you're going for Chain Rasps. If you're looking for a fighting unit, you're looking at either Reapers or more likely Revenants because of the other abilities they bring. Harridans, Glaive Wraith Stalkers, Hex Wraiths as a fighting unit don't even fit in. If you want a unit to fight, Revenants do it better. All these other units just don't bring anything to the table, and essentially the book, it has a lot of stuff that is irrelevant. And to me, that speaks of poor design because I think a well-written book, or any well-written book, every unit should be a viable choice. Every unit should have a role to play. It should do something unique on the table and should make you want to think when you're writing your book, oh, maybe I want to choose this unit over another unit. And there are valid reasons to go back and forth. In Nighthaunt, you don't have that. I think half the units in the book can just be thrown away, and what you're left with can still create a functional army. By taking the other units, you're making the army inherently weaker. I'm honestly left scratching my head at a lot of the unit choices, what they were thinking when they were writing them. There's a lot of filler in the book that just is largely irrelevant. And finally, it's the actual theme or identity of the way the army plays. So in my mind, I don't think that Nighthaunt plays significantly different from Legion of Nagash. I think that assuming Legion of Nagash can't take Nighthaunt allies, what is to differentiate the two that would make one a more interesting army to play over the other. They both have death saves. They both have some manner of recursion. Legion of Nagash has gravesites, which is a slightly weaker version of Underworlds, but I think that's balanced out by the fact that Legion of Nagash can do recursion through, I believe it's called Endless Legions, as well as the healing that gravesites provide. And so, unless you want to bring an army that just flies and is ethereal, I don't think Nighthaunt have anything significant over Legion of Nagash that would make the army different enough to want to play one or the other. They're both just about pushing models in, fighting the war of attrition, trying to resummon, and then having one or two fighting blocks to hammer the unit. When it comes to Legion of Nagash, they just bring more. They have better magic supremacy in terms of access to Nagash and their Mortarks, specifically Arc on the Black. They have units like the Necromancer, which, as Vent Hells, allows a unit to pile in and fight twice in the fight phase. Basically, it's a spell that is Wave of Terror. Yes, it can be unbound, but if you position your Necromancer properly, outside of 30 inches of an enemy wizard, it can't. So now Legion of Nagash can do what Nighthaunt will do. Because realistically, Nighthaunt will get, if you get 6 charges off, which is going to be the large portion of your army, you'll get 1. So Legion of Nagash can guarantee 1. And because you can ally in Nighthaunt, you can now cast it on that one Nighthaunt unit to do it. So Reapers. Like, I just think moving from Nighthaunt to playing Nighthaunt in Legion of Nagash, you've now upgraded. You've taken some of the best units, or some of the better units from Nighthaunt, specifically Chain Rasps and the Grimghast Reapers, and you've combined it with all the best abilities of Legion of Nagash. You can now also resummon your Nighthaunt units. So recursion is better. Why try and spend casting to summon D6 models every turn when you're probably going to be wiped, when you can just spend a command point to bring back the whole unit? Don't get. And then finally, there's Legion of Grief. This is what I ran for the better part of a year and a half, and it essentially takes Nighthaunt. You strip away all of the allegiance abilities, take all of the units, and then you combine it with Legion of Nagash allegiance abilities, and you give them the Necromancer. Like, what the fuck? Like, Legion of Grief, I think, is what Nighthaunt always should have been, for the most part. It's essentially Legion of Nagash 2.0. It's just Legion of Nagash with Nighthaunt. Legion of Nighthaunt. You get the recursion of gravesites. You get Deathly Invocations from the Necromancer. You have Endless Legions, so your general can resummon whole units for command points. And then prior to this summer's Handbook, combining their general trait, Vassal of the Craven King, along with Aether Quartz Brooch, would essentially allow you to roll 2 dice every time you spent a command point. Any 5+ gave you a command point back. If you do the math, it's something like 44%, 46% chance of getting 1 command point back. And then there is I believe a 20-something or 16% chance, something around that range, of getting 2 command points back. This allowed the army to essentially farm command points, even more if you threw in Kurdos to try and steal your opponent's command points. In almost every game I played as Legion of Grief, you essentially would go into turn 2 or 3 with like 4 or 5 or 6 command points. And it gave you a huge buffer so that you could throw units in, play the attrition game, and trade without sacrificing your army, because you could always resummon them back unless your general died. And that was always the risk of playing, that's always the risk of playing death. Once your general dies, the army is essentially dead. Even back in fantasy, if you killed the Vampire Lord, the army was essentially dead. You won the game. The problem was the Vampire Lord was so hard to kill that if you ever managed to kill him anyways, you had already won the game through effort. So that's cool. I actually like that idea of death armies being tied to their general, their magical abilities or their magical prowess, or just the energy surrounding them, or what binds the army together. And by killing them, you essentially beat the army. It's less of an impact in Age of Sigmar. Armies don't crumble. But when you kill the generals in the death armies of Legion of Nagash and Legion of Grief, they can no longer do their recursion. So if you can do it earlier on turn 1 or 2, you significantly hamper the army. But yes, so I think that Nighthaunt were at their quote-unquote height of their power in Legion of Grief. Unfortunately, you still run into the same issues with the uniformity of stats. Realistically, there were only a handful of units that are worth taking. And they were basically Chain Rasps, Chain Gas, and Revenants. I took a Black Coach because the model was cool, great centerpiece, good support unit, but that's pretty much it. I don't think there's much else that the book has to offer. And I know I rambled a bit. I hope in editing, I can try and make that a little more coherent and cohesive, but essentially that's why I think Nighthaunt are a poorly designed army. There's no cohesion in their units. Their heroes and their units don't synergize well. Their battalions suck. Their legion's ability is not even worth writing about. And a lot of the book, a lot of the units in that the army has just aren't worth taking. They're cool models. I think it's a very cool looking army to collect and to paint. But as it is, there's no point. If you're playing for competition, if you're playing to bring a competitive army, there's only like 3 or 4 units in the book that are worth it. So if I were to rewrite the book, what would I change? The first is I would change Wave of Terror. I don't think it should be random. I think it should either be a command point ability or automatically guaranteed for the first unit that charges in. If I made it a command ability, I would make it so that the first unit cost 1 CP, and then you could do it again on a second unit, but it would cost 2. You could do it again on a third unit, but it would cost 3. Alternatively, change the mechanic entirely. I think if you're going to call an ability a Wave of Terror, I think it would be cool to allow Nighthaunt to actually play into Bravery debuff army. So death by themselves naturally give a -1 bravery to units within, I believe it's 6 inches. I think it would be cool if Nighthaunt, through Wave of Terror, for every consecutive round of combat, including the first, would apply an additional -1 bravery debuff. So that means that for every consecutive turn, every round of combat that you're stuck in combat, you're stacking that bravery debuff. So the longer that they're stuck fighting you, the more terrifying it is. It would also be cool, I think, thematically, if you combined it with almost an army-wide ability. I would give it to the entire army to retreat and charge. One, to give you the choice. You can retreat and charge for mobility for options, or you can choose to stay in combat for the bravery debuff. I think the imagery of it would be very, very cool, although it would obviously have to be balanced in terms of points and what units can do. The second is I would give Nighthaunt some form of better recursion. I don't know if I think that they should get whole units back like Legion of Nagash or Legion of Grief do. I think that mechanic also needs rebalancing. I don't think it's fair that any unit, whether it's 10 Chain Rats or 20 Revenants, only costs 1 CP to bring back is fair. I think the CP should be tied into either the points value or the size of the unit, much like summoning is for Chaos Demons. And I think that's something that needs to be balanced for Death Armies overall. But I think that Death Armies should all have it. Whatever the recursion mechanic is, I think it should be uniform across the board, because for me, that's, I think, one of the core narrative strengths of Death is the fact that it is endless waves of models. And I love seeing it translated on the battlefield. The third is I would rewrite a lot of the units to, one, provide thematic tie-ins between the heroes and the units, to create different strata, or I guess different groupings of what the units and heroes do, so that the army plays a little differently depending on how you build it. And then that will also solve the problem of giving you unit variety and giving you an option to take different units for what they do on the table and how you want the army to play. So for example, you could have a Dread Sisters, quote unquote, sub-faction, where it's units like your Tomb Banshees, and your Herodins. Give them some sort of limited or short-range ranged attack, similar to the Tomb Banshees' Ghostly Howl. Don't roll it off bravery, but make it a single die roll per model, like a 4+, 5+, or 6+, 3-inch range or 6-inch range, do a mortal wound. I think thematically it ties into the Wailing Banshee aspect of the unit. It gives the army a bit of shooting, and it gives you a reason to take other units like the Banshees and the Herodins beyond just their ability to fight. Similarly, you could have Executioners, something like the Karn Wraiths, the Lord Executioner, and the Grimghast Reapers. They have their extended reach, and then maybe in combat, if they roll like a 6+ to hit, maybe it automatically goes to wound, or the attack ends and they do a mortal wound. So they're literally just blowing your units. I think that there are the Jailers, which already actually have a very cool theme. Your Spirit Torment, your Chain Gas, and your Revenants. They get this cool ability where when they're tied together, they reroll hits. That's their ability because they're fighting in a frenzy. So I think that's very, very cool. I think another sub-faction that would be neat would be a Knight faction, which is all your mounted units, your Shrouds on Steeds, your Dread Blades, and your Hex Blades, giving them some sort of extra attack or extra strength when they charge, plays into the Knight feeler aspect of the army. Legion of Grief was my main army up until this summer's Handbook, because I felt that it was the most competitive way to run the army. But with the removal of the Aether Quartz Brooch, they've essentially killed CP farming, And with newer armies being able to dish out a lot of mortal wounds, I think the one inherent advantage that Legion of Grief had, being ethereal, no longer applies. So 2 strengths of the army, being ethereal and having almost unlimited recursion, have been taken off the table. And so I don't think that the army is competitive anymore. It's still fun to play. It's very tricksy, and it has a few aces up its sleeve, which is why I've played it for so long. But because Age of Sigmar is a game I want to play competitively, I don't think Nighthaunt are up there anymore. I don't think I can win games as well or as consistently against many of the newer armies, and that's why I am retiring them until, if and when Games Workshop either rewrites the Battletome or they get another supplement or a White Dwarf that ironically gives them life again. So that's it. That's all I really have to say on the matter. It's an army that I love to hate, and unfortunately an army that I will no longer be playing until it becomes playable. I hope I was able to edit my ramblings and rants into some sort of coherent video, and I hope that you found it at least mildly entertaining to wallow and enjoy my suffering and misery. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more weekly content, and to follow my Instagram @SirJohnTheHo for daily updates on my hobby projects. Until next time, happy hobbying.